Hello everyone, welcome to episode 2 of ITG Syncing with Reaper. I figure that a lot of you have been highly anticipating this episode as we'll be talking about how to sync songs with tempo changes as well as songs that contain drift. If you haven't seen the first video and just really want to sync your Drifty boys, now would be a good time to go back to the first video and at least look at how I initially set up Reaper with all of its settings so that things that I do in this video will end up working properly, because if you don't, things will not go as expected. So let's say you find a song you really want to step, but it has a gradual, speed up, or slow down in it somewhere, or just a tempo change in general. The first thing you want to do is figure out the general area where this tempo change begins to occur. So we can take a listen here. So here we can see it slows down and then begins to do a gradual speed up. So basically anything before that, it's going to be a steady BPM. So we can sync everything up to this point just like a normal song. So we're just going to cut it to a 0 offset so that it can line up with our grid nice and neat. Okay. Now that we have it cut to a 0 offset, we can pinpoint exactly where this BPM change begins to occur. We can see it's lining up here, but at this point it no longer lines up. So now we have to figure out what is happening here. You can tell that in this measure alone that it's slowing down quite a bit. So the first thing we can do, we can clearly see that this beat here is not in line anymore. So what we can do is insert a BPM change here with Shift and C, which brings up this menu, and you can change the tempo. You can even change the time signature and all that. We're not going to do that though. We're just going to leave it as is. And then we're going to go to the next beat and insert another tempo change with Shift C. And then with this tempo change, we're going to hold Control and grab it and drag it to the right. And this is going to change the tempo of the first BPM change to make it line up exactly with the next beat. So we can see that it's slowing down for sure. And then basically this is just a rinse and repeat until you get your desired sync. There's a few things you can do. You could sync by every beat. You could sync by every eighth if you want to be more precise. If you do at least by quarter notes, it's going to be okay. But as you get to slower and slower tempos, it's going to be more noticeable. Also, since this last BPM marker is back at 206, it kind of is deceiving that it makes you think that this is going to be the next beat, but that's not the case. If you're ever unsure, just remove the last one, and it will make more sense as to what the next beat is actually going to be. So we can reinsert a new one that will be at the slower tempo, and then add a new one here, and then we can just drag it again. And we can just repeat this over and over for this entire section. Okay, I believe here it slows down to half tempo maybe. Not quite, but pretty close. And another thing you can do is use very well-defined hits to figure out where are good points to sync to are. So in this case, there's this beat here, which is on an eighth. So we can change the grid spacing to be on eighths now. And we can sync to this eighth note here to get even more precise syncing. And we can see that the next beat is also right here. Can remove that. And it's just basically just rinse and repeat. And you can see that it's speeding up every time. Sometimes while I am syncing stuff like this, I'll have StepMania open alongside with this and input the tempo changes in StepMania as I'm syncing it to double check to make sure that things are lining up on the correct beats and I'm not accidentally skipping over anything or doing anything wrong. Another thing is if these waveforms here, if there's like a section that's very like illegible, you can skip ahead and try to sync a later beat. So we can try syncing to this one here. And then in theory, the stuff back here should make more sense as to where it's supposed to line up. And I believe it does. And we can fine tune this a little more. One thing that I should note is that when you're picking out beats and things to sync to, you want to be as thorough as possible, really, because if you find that while playing it, you're picking up a lot of excellence and greats because you just simplified it too much, and you have to go back and fix it. What ends up happening is when you try to change these, everything afterwards is not going to line up anymore, and then you have to fix each individual one that you already did when you didn't have to in the first place. So always try to be as thorough as possible when syncing speedups and slowdowns for that reason. And one more thing just to add, when you're syncing things, it's always good to save a backup project file. Just to always keep it on handy in case something goes wrong and you need to change something in the future. I don't know. I've had a lot of times where I wish I've done that and I hadn't. Okay, I have one more thing that I want to talk about now. So let's say you did sync this and it's all finished and everything, but you wanted to cut something in the beginning out. And now you have all these BPM changes here and you're like, oh no, what do I do? So it's actually not a big deal. It's not too bad of a fix. I will show you how to do that in a second, if I can make a good cut. So So we're going to cut there and just have it go immediately into here. Because normally if you just drag this back, these tempo changes aren't going to move and they're not going to line up with the waveform anymore. So that cut does work. So let's undo that. We can highlight this entire section, right click, and then we're going to do remove contents of selection, moving later items. And this will move the tempo changes along with the waveform. And now it still lines up just the way it did before. And everything is still Gucci. And we have a shorter cut now. So once you have it all synced and finished, nice and tidy, can check the end of the song to make sure that everything's lining up properly and that you did your job right and that you didn't miss anything. It seems just fine. So you have a couple options. Like if the song were longer, you could, now that it's lined up for the second half, you could cut stuff out or loop stuff or anything like that, and it would be really easy. And if you haven't rendered your file already, you could do so now and bring it into Stepmania, and then basically you just literally just insert these BPM changes by hand one at a time, making sure that you're on the right beats. Since I'm in eighth notes right now, I have to be sure that I'm not accidentally putting them on quarter notes or on eighths accidentally that aren't supposed to be. Like this eighth here, I wouldn't want to accidentally put it a quarter note early before this beat. And that's basically it, really. It's not too complicated, and it's pretty quick. Like I did this whole thing in less than 5 minutes. Okay, next we're going to talk about dealing with songs that just are drifty in nature. Usually, rock songs, anything live recorded is going to be drifty. Video game rips from like old systems, anything like that. Chiptune songs made on Game Boy also will drift. So let's just jump right into it. So to be honest, it's not that different from syncing slowdowns and speedups. So we can just start right off the bat by cutting to a 0 offset with that note. So we can try to sync this bit right here with Shift C, inserting a new tempo change and dragging it while holding Control to change the tempo. And see, that doesn't quite line up. So with drift, you have a few options. You could sync very, very meticulously and then try to normalize the tempo of the entire project. Or you could just do a rough sync and then have those BPM changes exist within the SM file and just deal with it. Personally, I like being very meticulous and doing the tempo fix because it's not too bad to do. It used to be really awful, but thanks to ITG Alex, there's a method which makes it not awful. So we're going to do a more meticulous route. So we're going to do like every beat basically. And it's kind of slow, but in the end, it's very much worth it. So we're just going to sync a little bit here, nothing too crazy. These waveforms are kind of messy. That's just the general nature of how this genre works. And sometimes the waveforms are super messy and you cannot read anything that's going on. You can kind of see what's happening, but it's still very messy. So even if it's just like approximates, And if you're doing a rough sync, it's not going to be so bad. But if you're trying to be meticulous, you want to get as many as you possibly can. And like I said in the speed up and slow down section, you want to be as accurate as possible early on so that you don't have to come back and fix everything later. And since we cut this to a 0 offset, we could just export this immediately right now and throw it in Stepmania, and we can apply our BPM changes alongside with what we're doing here just to double check that things are lining up properly. You don't have to do that, but sometimes it really does help, especially if the waveform is very messy. And it in the long run, it can make your life a lot easier. So here I have an example of a more broad sync for a chart. As you can see, it's like once every measure, in some cases multiple measures in a row. So like this sync is fine if you're just inputting the BPM changes in ITG and you're not normalizing the tempo of the song itself. This is about what you would expect. Nothing too crazy. There might be a couple spots where you have more condensed sync than just once a measure. Like, I don't even know if this one does have it, but yeah, this is like a generic drifting sync where things mostly line up, you know, maybe a millisecond or two off here and there. Just a very broad sync. And yeah, with this kind of sync, you do not want to normalize it. You just want to input these BPMs in Stepmania and step it that way. Here's an example of a more meticulous sync. There are some parts that are just once a measure, but further in, there are parts where it's multiple times a measure. These are actually eighth notes that are synced. Just trying to sync to like every possible waveform that I can. And this is where you would want to normalize the BPM of a song. So let's say you did meticulously sync a song that's drifty and you got it all ready to go and you want to normalize the tempo. It's actually not that hard. It's a little tedious, but it's not too bad. So all you want to do is go through each BPM segment and split them into individual pieces. So you would click each tempo change and press S to split it. So now that we have everything split, and we're going to move on to the next part, which is changing the project settings. So we're going to go into File, Project Settings. So normally it'd be time and beats, but for this first one, we're going to change it from time to beats, position, length, and rate. Specifically, that rate is what we want. Do not save this as your default project settings just for this one project, and you're going to press OK. Next, what we want to do is figure out the basic tempo of this song. So we know that it's up here at 90 measures. Each of these has a measure counter up here at the top. It's the top number here, where it says 90.1. That's the first beat of measure 90. So we know it's 90 measures in 2 minutes and 28 seconds. I have this handy program that can calculate what BPM that is. So we have this program here. Enter number of beats to cut out. So it's 90 measures times 4, which is 360 beats. So we put that in, and then we enter the BPM, which we saw is a lot of 140-ish. And we're trying to get 2 minutes and 28 seconds, which is 148 seconds. So we're going to keep changing this until we get something close to 148. So 145 comes pretty close. So we could normalize the tempo of the song to 145, and then it would end up being about the same BPM as a whole in general. So what we do is we change this first one, double click, and set it to 145. And now you have a couple options. You could either meticulously, one at a time, relabel all these tempo changes to 145, or you can hold Alt and left click them and delete them. And as you can see, as I'm deleting these and changing the tempo, it's changing the rate on the song file itself. So now the song's going to run at a solid 145 for every tempo change that I make. So every time I'm deleting one and making it 145, it's changing the rate to make it 145 for each segment. So you do this for the entire song, and then your entire song will now play at 145 BPM, and you can render it as such, and that's it really. And there's no more drift, and it's really awesome. The old way that I used to do this was all entirely manual, and I would, cut these segments, put it in a new project, figure out what rate to change it to, and then export it, and then re-import it. And yeah, so this way is so much better, and that's why I took so much time to upload this video, because I didn't want people to have to do that the other way, and once I figured out this way, I knew I had to remake this video. So yeah. So one other thing is that if you're stepping a Drifty song and you're normalizing it, and let's say the song has a section where the tempo is slightly different, you could just as easily change the tempo markers here to reflect that. So like this song is 165. Let's say it had another segment where it was slower, and you could change it to be like 150 or 140 or something to match what it approximately is on the normal version of the song. I hope you guys find this helpful and useful. I know I did. I've learned a lot over the years about how to sync and deal with drift, and I know a lot of people still struggle with that, so I'm hoping that at least some people will pick up on this fairly easily. And if you guys have any questions or anything like that, just leave a comment, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible and help you as much as I can. Thank you.